Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining. My name is Amy Pace, and I am a Senior Product Marketing Manager here at ReversingLabs, focusing on our malware analysis and cyber threat intelligence. And Danil, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, everyone. My name is Daniil Panache. I'm one of the solutions architects / engineers here at ReversingLabs. I'll be walking through some of the more technical pieces of this webinar and going through a few examples specifically around the legal use case. But it's a pleasure to have everyone here.
And Danil, if you want, given you've been here much longer than me, kind of talk about our
Sure. Yeah, no problem. So, who we are. As a company, ReversingLabs has been around for a little over 15 years now. I think we just celebrated our 15th anniversary recently. We have a number of locations across the world, and really the main core of what our messaging, what our ideology is around making sure that every file that you have in your environment is secure and it doesn't introduce risk. This can come from many different facets, but realistically, and what will be going on about this on this call is when we're looking at deconstructing and finding out all the relevant information on files, our goal is to provide a high degree of trust and a high degree of certainty that the files that you keep within your environment are not introducing more risk in there. But all that is backed up, as we can see on the slide here, with 40 billion different examples, or samples rather, within our threat repository, which is about 8x beyond what our closest competitive offering is in the market. And we're able to we're able to deconstruct 4,800 different file types, over 400 binary types. I think the number is closer to 450 now, and packer types. And we're continuously adding to this database on a degree of about 15 million files analyzed per day. Now, this is all part and parcel with our ethos around providing the file deconstruction and file reputation analysis results at speed and at scale. So when we're looking at every single file that we're analyzing, we're enriching our database, we're continuously evolving the parameters and the information we're providing around those files. This is where a lot of the value really comes into play around the ReversingLabs story. But I think that's a pretty good summary.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. And we'll dig into a little more of why the fact that we do have this one of the world's largest threat repositories of goodware and malware, and our coverage and our ability to identify that many file types, over 4,800, and unpack over you were saying now up to 450 binary types. Really does make a difference, especially in this particular use case. And so with that, we will get started here. So just real quickly, and I don't I'm not gonna bore you with too many slides, but just wanted to talk a little bit about the rise in cyber attacks on the legal sector and challenges faced by legal teams today, and where existing tools are really falling short. And then I'll talk a little bit about how ReversingLabs can help, but really I'll pass it to Danil to do the demo and kind of really walk you through the workflow that we had a recent use case, real world use case, and he can talk a little bit more about that in detail of how they're leveraging our solution in their workflow. All right, so when we're talking about data breaches, what I always like to really point out is the fact that it's not just about the direct monetary costs; it's the indirect costs that are critical. And the legal industry, especially where trust and confidentiality, I mean, there really are everything. Your client data, protecting that data is imperative. And again, especially in the legal industry. When we're talking about the impact and the indirect costs, that comes in the form of reputational damage, loss of business opportunities, which translates to loss of direct revenue. That's a direct cost. But there's also legal liabilities and potential regulatory penalties. You have breach notification costs, which can definitely add up. And legal fees and settlements. So if you're breached and your client data is exposed, there can definitely be lawsuits coming your way. And I think the next slide I have kind of mentions the fact that that has definitely happened.
Yeah, and if I can just add on top of that, in addition to all of these very, very tangible impact of a breach, you also have to consider the people that are responding to this breach. I mean, I've done a number of weekends and nights in data centers in my career, and I can assure you it is not fun for anyone involved. So this is obviously reputational damage and the financial damage. Those are massive components of it, but you also have to remember that your employees are going to be affected by it as well. So there's a lot to consider here, both from the fiscal side as well as from the human capital side. I'm sorry,
Yeah,
Amy,
and
I'll hand it back to
that's
you.
a very good point. Yeah, definitely from the human capital side, yes. And it's always I always like to say, it's always, easier and cheaper to prepare in advance, have the right tools in place than try to recover from a breach afterwards.
Exactly. 100% agreed.
All right, so let's move on to the next slide. There we go. So the American Bar Association did a survey. This was in 2022, but over 25% of law firm surveys said they had experienced a breach in some form. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that the breach was, just this massive breach where client data was exposed or there was data exfiltration, but more that they have experienced a breach in some form. But going to the next stat I have there, 2023, there really was kind of a banner year for some of these breaches. There were some really high profile cases where there were, I think it was 8 law firms, and they varied in size. I think 4 or 5 of them were pretty large, but a couple of them were smaller law firms that did experience a real data breach that exposed client data. And as a result of that, not only was the ransom payments were made, and I don't know if I don't have any numbers around that, but I'm sure it was pretty costly. But they were brought into the class action lawsuit. So you don't, as a law firm, you don't want to be in the on the other side of that class action lawsuit. But this just goes to show that it really does happen, and the impact and it is real with these data breaches. And when it comes to client data and sensitive PII, you have to keep that secure and confidential.
Absolutely. And on top of that, you also have to remember that these data breaches, they're not all targeted attacks. There's so many opportunistic actors out there who will take any opportunity they can to expose or expound upon a vulnerability, upon a hole in the security system. And realistically, they're not always necessarily targeting law firms, but law firms tend to, because they process so many files, because
Yeah.
they go through so many of these facets, they tend to bear a lot of the brunt of what these attackers are trying to do. So again, if you think that you are small enough where you're not going to be targeted, it doesn't matter. All it takes is one opportunity, one hole for an attacker to gain a foothold, and from that point on, it's a completely different story.
Absolutely. And the attackers, they have it easy. They only have to find the one weak spot. The defenders, the security teams have to protect against all potential weak spots. So and the attackers they will find that one hole. All right, so we've kind of Daniil kind of hit on this. The legal sector really has become a prime target, a lucrative target for cyber criminals because of that. The treasure trove of information, high value information, that is stored and shared, in the legal sector. You're dealing with private client data, confidential data, IP, intellectual property, financial records, medical records, and so much more. And in today's world, information is currency for cyber criminals. And if they can get their hands on this data, they can hold it for ransom. They can also exfiltrate that and start selling that data, on the black market. So it really is. We hear about you see a lot in the news, the headlines where, you're more about the financial sector in the past, and the healthcare sector getting hit. But the legal sector is starting to, really come on the radar of these cyber criminals. I mean, just because, again, of just the treasure trove of information that they have the potential to get their hands on.
Yeah, and having worked with a number of different legal entities in the past, the one thing I do have to say, or especially around the whole idea that information is currency, always stay on top of the technology. Believe me, it's been at least in the 2010s, it was definitely an uphill battle a lot of times, trying to operationalize and get the technical aspects of law firms into a more emboldened, or not emboldened, I guess is the wrong word, but a more structured manner.
Yeah,
And so when it comes to protecting this information, compliance is a huge part of that, 100%. But that's not the only thing that they should be worried about. That's exactly the point. Is information by itself is super lucrative and super valuable within the ecosystem.
absolutely. And so, and what makes, the legal sector, pretty, more of an easy target is the e-discovery process, and the fact that, especially, in today's world, where just the sheer volume of data that's being, shared and transferred between external sources and external entities. I mean, just part of the, as part of the daily routine. I mean, that's what you've got to do that in the discovery process. So, I mean, that's what really makes the e-discovery process just really a perfect entry point for bad actors to gain that foothold into the organization. Again, talking about the increasing volume of files. But it's not just the sheer volume, but it's the complexity of the files today that are being shared, both in size and file type. It's not just documents anymore, but, images, videos, text messages from, cell phones. And Danil, you might know more, but just there's so many different file types now, and just the growing sizes of those file types.
Absolutely.
It's definitely making it tougher on security teams to get a grasp on a lot of this, and the detection gaps in the security tools is really what's becoming apparent with the growing volume and the growing complexity, and that's really what we're going to talk about. In the past, some of these legacy tools, they were sufficient, but nowadays it's having to keep up with just the sheer speed, the volume, and the size is just a massive undertaking. And existing tools are feeling the pressure and starting to buckle under the demand of that.
Exactly. And the complexity is not just applied to the files that are being shared. The complexity of the attack vectors is also increasing. I
Oh,
mean,
yeah.
gone are the days of you getting an email where it says openme.exe. It's not as obvious, it's not as upfront as it maybe once was. And so there's a lot of different ways to obfuscate this information. There's a lot of different ways to hide behind potentially benign elements within files, within entities. So again, when you keep in mind the different reasons of why this is becoming such a big topic, it's complexity is an accelerating path. It's not a linear relationship, and I think it's going to keep going down that road. So the more you can keep on top of and be able to simplify the complexity within the files, within the
Yep.
attack vectors, the easier it is going to be for your teams to actually be able to prevent the breach from happening in the first place.
Very good point. And so, here we're going to talk about, I mentioned, there, in the past, these, your AV solutions and your endpoint solutions and sandboxes, may have been sufficient. But nowadays they really are, you're starting to see the cracks in these solutions. And this is, this is not to say that these solutions don't have a place, in the organization. They absolutely do, but they need some help. They are definitely, they're not used to this type of volume and complexity. And that is showing. And the result of that is, when we talk about AV or endpoint, those can only analyze, certain layers deep. Today's malware is hiding in, if we're talking about, maybe AV and endpoint analyzing, like 2 layers deep in the, we're talking about going, 9 more layers. The malware developers, they are really embedding the malware, making it so difficult. And the AV and endpoint solutions today just aren't going that deep in their analysis, and as a result, this malware is getting through, and that it's also producing a lot of false positives. And the SOC teams today are just under pressure from all over, but false positives is a really huge deal. I mean, that takes up so much time chasing down all these false alerts. And when we're talking about sandboxes, yeah, those absolutely have their place, but with the volume, sandboxes really, they weren't meant to handle the high volume of files, and I would say the large files. As the volume increases, the costs go up for sandboxes. As the size of those files that need to be analyzed, if they can even be analyzed in a sandbox, it takes so much longer to try to do that in a sandbox. And a lot of the malware today can detect that they are in a sandbox, and they know how to evade that detection. And so that has become a real problem. They are, these developers of this malware they are building in ways to avoid sandbox detection. And Danielle, you can maybe speak more about that, but that goes into like delayed detonation. But they're able to detect that, hey, I know I'm in a sandbox, so I'm not going to detonate. And as a result, the sandbox says, oh, this file is good, and it just moves on its merry way. And what you're left with is just malware slipping through the cracks.
Yeah, exactly. And just to kind of really touch on quickly on the AV endpoint side, nothing against antivirus engines. In fact, I'll show you in our demo, we do leverage
Yeah,
different scanners
they
for
definitely have their place.
analysis.
Yep.
Exactly. But typically what we do with AV endpoint and sandboxes is those are points of enrichment. The initial analysis, with sandboxes, the scalability is one of the biggest pieces. Obviously, the evasion by malware is a worrisome aspect of it, but you cannot scale multiple running boxes in a good way. Let's put it that way. It's very difficult to scale from a computer resource perspective and from a human resource perspective to actually to look into the files and determine what's relevant and what's not.
Yeah.
But all of that can be used as enrichment for a static analysis approach. And that's what I'll show you as well within a demonstration in a couple of minutes here. But thank you again for touching on these. These are super important to understand as the basis of the existing ecosystem and what can be done in the future.
All right. So now we're going to get into how ReversingLabs can really help overcome these challenges. And it starts with if you want to go to the next slide there, our high speed, what we call complex binary analysis. So we're able to fully dissect and deconstruct the internal contents of these files and do it in just mere seconds or milliseconds, without detonating that file. So with our, this is proprietary technology, but we can fully deconstruct a file to its basically atomic elements without having to, without having to detonate the file. And from there, we're able to extract all of the this threat detail and give the SOC teams really what I think is key is this verified threat classifications, very prescriptive of why we classified this as a threat, and giving them this a term we like to use is explainable threat intelligence. So it's human readable. You can understand, okay, you classified this bad, but why is it bad? And that's key, and that allows SOC teams to really accelerate their decision process, if we're right away, we can tell them good or bad, really is what they're looking for. Give them that additional context, and then without delaying, what, if you say you have to send something to a sandbox, then again, you're bringing in these delays, and you're causing bottlenecks in workflows and just slowing everything down. We overcome that challenge with our binary analysis that can handle, not just the complex files and the range of file types that we're talking about, like the 4,800, being able to identify 4,800 file types. So we're able to overcome the challenge of the number of file types, the size of those, but the volume that's coming in. When you're trying to process, thousands of files, there's no way you're going to be able to do that without creating bottlenecks with traditional solutions. You're either going to something's going to get dropped or missed. Something's going to get through, that shouldn't. You're going to be chasing down false positives, and you're just going to be slowing down the workflow for everyone. And we can jump to the next slide, and that kind of just talks about, more of, what we're able to do with our complex binary analysis. So again, being able to analyze those files in, when we're talking milliseconds, that is key when we're talking about, organizations such as law firms that in the e-discovery process that deal with this high volume amount of files coming to them, day in and day out. And that coverage is key. We have the broadest coverage in the industry of the number of file formats that we are able to identify, and the amount of file formats we can unpack. No one else comes close to what we're able to do there with coverage. At the beginning of this presentation, we talked about our threat intelligence repository being, one of the largest in the world, with our database of goodware and malware. But something I did not touch on, but I'm glad I have it here, is the fact that we can do the private file analysis. And this is key, especially for industries like the legal sector, where you're dealing with so much sensitive and confidential data. You want that ability to have the private file analysis, and as opposed to trying to send it out to some sort of public sandbox that does not have those privacy controls. So privacy is definitely key. And then, this is what, Danielle will be able to show more of this, but, our direct integration with your existing tools. So direct integration from the point of being able to integrate with from the file ingestion point. So being able to automatically ingest files from, your cloud storage or your SMB shares, wherever those files might reside. But also then being able to integrate with, the downflow tools like your SimSort, being able to enrich those and just make those tools work better for you. And feel free if there's any other key points or features that you want to point out. These are ones that I think are really applicable to to this use case, especially.
Yeah, no, I think you covered it perfectly. In fact, once we go through the workflow diagram, I'll talk through kind of how these are all located operationally within the workflow from a real world example. So, and a lot of these elements are, incredibly important to consider when it comes to ensuring that what you have is safe and secure. So, if you don't mind, if we go over to the next slide,
and this is where I will turn it over to you, and
yeah. No problem.
Take it from here.
Yeah, no worries. Thanks, Amy. So I hope everyone is enjoying their Pi Day. I forgot to mention in the very beginning, happy March 14th. But kind of diving right into the crux of this, firms in the legal world will typically have a number of places that files will come from, right? And the rising number of connection points just serves to introduce that many more opportunities for risk. So this workflow is coming from one of our law firm customers who utilize the ReversingLabs A1000 as their primary source of truth and analysis for all elements file related within an environment. So whether you're looking to augment existing workflows involving legacy AV, like what we talked about before, or bolster email security gateway, depth of scanning results, or just have validation and reputation of files, this is where the A1000 can plug directly into into this kind of workflow via the myriad of API and integration capabilities that we have. In this specific scenario, we have an S3 connector that's feeding files directly into the A1000. This S3 bucket is used for ad hoc file storage, as is the on-premises file share repository, the second one you see on the bottom there, it says SMB. Now, the Ladder directory and the eDiscovery repository, in this case, are both connected via SMB to the A1000. In addition to that, we also have email connected directly to the A1000 via OAuth 2, but we also do support legacy IMAP connectivity, kind of what I have running in my lab. We'll see in a couple of minutes here. Now, each of these connection points is available straight out of the box in A1000 deployment, so integrating your workflows is incredibly simple and easy. Having said all that, even if you have a proprietary mechanism that you would like to leverage on directing files to the A1000, the expansive API ecosystem makes that possible, even with homebrewed solutions. And that's something that we see fairly commonly in many different organizations who don't necessarily get all of their solutions and platforms as off-the-shelf entities. So the two file share repositories that we're seeing here are locations for ad hoc file storage that you normally would use in any file server. So your typical repository that users and individuals within an organization will use to store any kind of files. We're talking executables, documents, PDFs, music files, video files I've seen in many different locations. And due to the lack of ability to ascertain provenance and trust of many of these files, it's important to figure out whether or not those are safe to have in your environment. The same can be said around the eDiscovery, especially when it comes to scanning all files that are uploaded to the file server for eDiscovery purposes. And because this inherent trust and inherent provenance is difficult to ascertain, as I mentioned before in the earlier conversation, the opportunistic and the targeted attacks have a much easier time to potentially leverage an exploit or leverage some hole or breach within the security posture to, again, deny services to or exfiltrate the data that's present. So we set the stage on the files themselves. Once those files are uploaded to the A1000, thanks to that static binary analysis engine that Amy talked about just a couple slides before, each file is recursively unpacked all the way down to its roots, and all relevant context, metadata, file information, etc., is extracted. So it's thanks to this methodology that ReversingLabs can say with a very high degree of confidence whether the files are benign or malicious. This is considerably more involved in your typical signature matching mechanisms, such as your legacy AV solutions, since we extract all indicators of behavior in addition to compromise, compare and contrast against similar files within a database, and provide classification results from many different AV scanners, which again, we'll see in an example here. And once we have all that, we also apply, as we talked about earlier on, explainable machine learning to provide a fully comprehensive data set on whether a file will introduce risk into the environment. From here, once we go through all that scanning capability, the A1000 has built-in functions to move files or emails to appropriately designate containers as malicious, benign, or unknown. In addition to the scan results, the A1000 provides analysts a workbench to dive deeper into any files for a deeper examination. So further, in that case, further enrichment can be done via connections to the Titanium Cloud repository, which you'll see in the very top, in addition to connections to our own cloud sandbox or third-party sandbox solutions. As I mentioned before, sandboxes are fantastic for enriching the data, looking at the processes at runtime, but as a standalone entity, scalability becomes a big concern, which is where the static analysis is such a big part of the process. Now, once all that is done, and once we have the connectivity to the file repositories all set, we can also send the analysis results downstream to something like a SIM, a SOAR, or a TIP. Excuse all my acronyms here; it's just part of the cybersecurity world. But they can be sent down to all the different platforms for further automation capabilities. So to sum it up, from a high-level perspective, all the files are fed into the A1000 from multiple different sources via the built-in integrations processed by the A1000, and the resultant reports are then optionally enriched via Titanium Cloud, the detonation sandboxes, and accessed by the SOC/malware analysts and threat hunters, which are then sent further downstream for reporting and data lake storage purposes. So all that aside, let's take a look at some of these analysis results that we've seen fairly commonly across the ecosystem. And I'll go through a few examples, including ones that are you'll recognize as fairly common use cases, as well as some of the more esoteric ones that have a little more nuance to them when it comes to the deconstruction. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here real quick, and hopefully it behaves. Give me 1 second here. All right, hopefully that's showing up.
Yeah, that we can see that.
Beautiful. All right, so what we're looking at here, this is the A1000. Right now I'm already in a sample. Before I dive into the sample analysis, in this case, the sample details, I really want to, again, discuss the idea of the integrations. Again, we're able to connect directly to different cloud repositories, such as Azure Data Lakes, S3 buckets, SMB or NFS shares from the local networking side, and of course, the email side. The first example I'll be going through is an email. Again, this is fairly ubiquitous in terms of the way that we process things, but you will dive into a little more around the intricacies of why this email is coming up as malicious and what we can glean from this specific scenario here. So right out of the gate, we have the very top level, kind of a glaring red, daunting looking, almost like a ghost robot icon on the very top left. This is us saying that this is something that we know is malicious. It has a 10 out of 10 risk score. It's a backdoor. We actually have the malware family description all the way down here. And we can see that the classification reason of why we're giving this a high rating is because of the extracted files. We'll get to this in a couple of seconds. So once we have all this information in place, it's important for us to understand, how did we catch this? Well, in this case, we have a couple of different facets we can look at under file classifications. The email itself, we have the format signature match, which is found via the Titanium Core engine. That's the main engine that unpacks all these files. And we have the attachment itself, and we'll see the path directly here, which has a little more information there, including TIE Core, tag cloud validation, and malware, and elements therein, including some machine learning. Of course, as we're looking at the extracted files, we'll see the different file types here, as well as the files and indicators, and we'll see the indicators of behavior down on the description side here. So let's go ahead and actually take a look at what those extracted files look like. Because in this case, the email itself, not very interesting, right? The message, we deconstruct the header, we look at the different elements therein. If it's not necessarily interesting here, we can dive into the attachment itself. So in this case, as we go into the attachments, very easy for us to go in and say, okay, now I know that this attachment has this poison ivy backdoor Windows executable or Windows script of some sort. So as we dive into this, and I already have it spun up here for an interest of time, we can see that in this case, 36 out of 37 scanners have found it, which is fantastic. That means that it's something that we're seeing as malicious across the board. The one big thing also that we provide validation on is, do your AV scanners, can they catch what we're looking at here? And you'll see here that the threat was not detected by some of the configured scanners. So it's a good way to cross-reference and double check to make sure that your AV scanners are doing the work they're supposed to be doing. But all I have to say is, as we're going down into this specific attachment here, we can go back to how we caught this, and we'll see the exact same scenario around the file classification and threat name on the right-hand side here. In addition to that, we also see some malware configuration information, which I'll dive into in a couple of minutes. So as we're looking at this information here, and we go into the application analysis section, we can see actually why we gave it a much lower rating, specifically here. In this case, we see a security grade of F. The two that I really want to point out here is this one here that's set to a D, data execution prevention feature flag is not set, and the overlap between headers and first section has been detected. And this is something that we see as a major element as part of determining whether or not this is malicious. And so we can see that this is something that's not supposed to be as part of this specific file here. Now, as we're going into down the road, there's a lot of information, a lot of context we can provide. I'm not going to go too deep into it. The only thing I want to call out here is the sections section, where we're able to see different elements like individual file section hashes and entropy levels or the cryptographic elements that are present within those sections there. And so there's a lot of different ways we can visualize this. There's a lot of different pieces that we can see here, but this is something that we can dive into probably in a later time. So as we're seeing this information here, we can go down into the malware configuration, And we'll get also the same viewpoint that we saw on the how we caught this around the actual malware family itself. In that case, we also see this misspelled memory.exe, including a localhost callback here. And of course, as we're going down the classification road, same thing that we saw before, we can dive deeper into exactly why and what elements we saw within this section here. It's titanium core, again, that's the engine that statically deconstructs, the antivirus we found, as well as the unpacker for poison ivy that we have built in into the titanium core engine. The machine learning element, I'll go into in a little bit in a different example, but it's also something that we pull in as part of the analysis process to determine whether or not something is malicious. Now, as we're going down this, one of the things as a threat hunter, what I would want to find out is this something that we can potentially look for elsewhere on our environment? What if it's not an opportunistic attack? What if it's targeted? What if someone is trying to leverage the poison ivy malware family to actually target the organization? Well, this is where we can look at the massive database that we talked about earlier on around the file similarity. And as we'll see here, and again, interest of time, I already have it open, we'll see all of these different files, all these different hashes. What they all have in common is that they are part of the same similarity that we've seen within this poison ivy malware family. And as a threat hunter or malware analyst, what I would want to do at that point is potentially fetch and analyze some of these examples to compare and contrast, maybe grab some of these hashes for the signature matching that the AV engine will be using, or figure out if this is something that's part of a larger attack. Now, that's just one fairly general example around email attachments. Again, if you've dealt with email security gateways, this will all look very, very familiar to you. The next example that I want to talk through is something that's more commonly found within something like an e-discovery, and that's a document file. In this case, it's a Microsoft Word document. Now, this one, again, how we caught this and the classification reason here, in this scenario is AV, right? We see 17 out of 20 scanners detected it. Again, not found by some of the configured scanners. And as we go in here, we'll see that exactly come out. So AV found this exploit, CVE 2021-40444, and we're able to see this across both the entirety of the document file, as well as this xml.rels file that we'll dive into in a couple of minutes here. But why this is important is because now we can also see, hey, are there any other similarities around this specific file within the exploit world? And we'll go into that actually here. And we can see, I think this is, sorry, this one over here. We'll see that we are able to find different files that use this exploit across our database. Now, what this little icon on the left-hand side means here, the black cloud, that means that it's publicly accessible information. These are all samples you can download, you can extrapolate, you can analyze them, and you can use them as part of your threat hunting capabilities. So even if this is something that's you're seeing for the first time, you can see all the different files and entities that are using this specific exploit here as part of the analysis process. I'll close this one here. So well, let's go ahead and dive a little bit deeper into this. And that's when we're looking at the rels document file. So as we go into the extracted files, we can see under Word that this is red. And excuse me, I'm colorblind, so I'm pretending that it's red. But we see under the rels directory here, the actual document.xml.rels file. And this is what we were looking at before here. So this is the actual entity itself that is malicious. And so as we're going into this, right, we can see, again, from the multi-scanner count, not every scanner found it, but we hit a critical mass of scanners that did. And then how we caught this is via a number of different ways, but primarily this address is a Cobalt Strike beacon. And this is something that we're able to pull out as part of the analysis process. In addition to that, we see all the other network references that are relevant here. But in this case, it's all schema information that's not really relevant to the actual maliciousness or malicious nature of this file in particular. On to another attack with Microsoft Excel. Again, a file that will very commonly be used or very commonly be found within e-discovery environments. Same kind of process, same kind of workflow. You notice here the multi-scanner count is a little bit lower, but we're still found it via the antivirus reputation result. But in addition to that, we'll dive into this, is the machine learning element. So the overall file, the Excel file, was found via AV scanning, but the update file, which we'll dive into in a couple of seconds here, was found via the explainable machine learning element. And so as we're going into this, we also start noticing a couple of those indicators. or behaviors around the kernel 32 DLL. And that's something that we want to keep tabs on and want to keep track of as we're going into this specific section. And so as we're going into the extracted file, same kind of workflow as before, we'll see the update file here. And this is what it looks like again from the analysis perspective. We have the sample details. We have all the information relevant to it. Heuristic is the analysis result that we have. And this is where we have the explainable machine learning that I talked about before. And that's how we caught this here. Now, where explainable machine learning really comes to play is within something like an indicators section here, where we're able to see all the different processes, functions. In this case, it's all Excel 4 code, indicator matching, strings, symbols, anything that we find that matches our repository of activity or actions that a file can take, we call out here. And so out of the gate, loading the kernel 32 DLL library may not be as interesting, but it can write to other process memory. It has other capabilities like creating threads. All of this combined together shows a very stark picture of what this is actually able to do within an Excel macro. And so as we're looking at this information, it's really important to understand that these are all, again, cookie crumbs on the way to a bigger picture or a bigger solution to the mystery, so to speak. And all of this data we provide via that static analysis ability that the Titanium core engine is able to go through. Last example, I swear, I know at this point it's a number of different facets we're going down, but this one is just one that I like because it shows that we're able to look at even obfuscated data. This is just a simple JPEG file, 3.7 kilobytes. And as we go into the indicators, again, those indicators of behavior, not compromise, we're able to see that we're seeing some data here that's encoded via the base64 algorithm. And so as we go into the actual image metadata, we'll see this exif information right over here. And so as it's looking at this evaluation, it's running this specific base64 encoded string. One of our analysts, Patrick Knight, was able to decode it, and this is exactly what it does within the file itself. And so this is something that we take into account, regardless of whether it's being obfuscated, regardless of whether or not someone's trying to hide it. We'll be able to call it out regardless of where it sits within the file itself.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, I think that's just really key with our ability to do that. And that's where, you know, we were talking about, you know, other security tools not able to really find, you know, when it's embedded that deep.
Exactly. And that's what we've shown before as well, is when we're going into all the different extracted files, you know, if we're looking at the initial email that we have here, you can see a lot of the extracted files, it goes deeper and deeper and deeper. So very often we'll see an email with a document, with a macro, with a PowerShell script, with something else that's in there. There's a whole tree of these different elements. And again, it's all through attempts at obfuscation. It's all through attempts at hiding what is the actual payload within the file itself. Absolutely. That's it for the example portion. Hopefully that was useful and relevant as part of the process here. I'll hand the baton back over. But I think if we have any questions, we can also go through those.
Yeah, so just kind of wrapping up very in brief. I know we gave you guys a lot of information in this presentation, but the legal sector really is a growing target for cyber criminals. You know, it really, the amount of information and the type of information is just, you know, cyber criminals, that it's a perfect target, perfect treasure trove of information. In the e-discovery process that, you know, inherent to you know, to the legal sector is really the perfect entry point for malware. And what you, again, whether we're talking about targeted attacks, as Daniil was talking about, or just opportunistic, having problems speaking today. You know, it's the e-discovery process and the gaps in the existing security tools really do make it, you know, again, the perfect entry point for you know, the bad actors to take a foothold into the organization. And then, you know, as Daniil showed, and then we talked about, ReversingLabs using our high-speed complex binary analysis, we really are able to overcome these challenges. We can deal with the volume of, you know, the amount of files that need to be processed, you know, each day. We can deal with the complexity of the file types. And we can scale to the point where, again, this would cripple you would not be able to do this with a dynamic, with the sandbox, the dynamic analysis piece. So we have no problem with that. So I mean, I think that really is key for this use case, is the the high speed, high throughput capabilities we have, and the fact that we really can analyze any file and take it down to its base components, given with that full deconstruction that we're doing on that file. Where antivirus might go a couple layers deep, but as Daniel showed, like it starts to do, you have to really traverse that file all the way down, and that's where these malware developers are, they're getting more sophisticated each day in their ability to embed and hide malware into what would seem like a legitimate file. And so we're able to overcome those challenges. We're able to really boost your existing security tools capabilities, make those tools work better for you, and catch the malware that's slipping through the gaps, and fit into existing workflows. I think is key with our integration. So you can really just drop our solution in, and we have so many direct integrations, from the file ingestion endpoint to the enrichment side of things, that we're going to be able to fit in and not create any bottlenecks. In fact, we're going to be able to accelerate your analysis workflows. And Neil, if you have anything to add.
No, I think you hit the nail on the head in all of these. It's, again, when it comes to the scalability side of the equation, that's something that's unmatched. Static analysis will always be the fastest and the most scalable way to do it. Again, nothing against dynamic detonation. I think there's a time and place for it, 100%. But if you're looking to, especially, if you're looking at massive amounts of files coming in through e-discovery, or you just have, Fred and accounting downloading MP3s all day long, it doesn't matter. You still have to be able to scan all those files at speed and at scale.
Yeah, and when we're talking about static analysis, there is the traditional static analysis. We're talking about a whole different level of static analysis. Our capabilities, people think of legacy static analysis. It doesn't necessarily extract everything you need, but with our titanium core engine that Daniil was talking about, we really are able to provide this really complex binary static analysis in a way that traditional static analysis tools can't match. And of course, the dynamic, you're not gonna be able to do it with your dynamic analysis and your sandboxes.
Precisely.
All right, so I think we may run a little bit over. We can open it up to questions. We could also, if you have questions, after we're done with the webinar, you can reach out to us. And we also have we will add a link when we post the webinar. We have a solution brief about the legal use case in e-discovery. So definitely take a look at that.
We do have one question that came in a little bit earlier on. I think we already did answer it, but we can touch on it one more time. The question is, if we already have an AV solution present, why would we need something like an A1000 to do the scanning? That's kind of the whole idea of depth of scanning, right? Are you actually extracting the relevant indicators, the relevant files, the relevant pieces of the puzzle using an AV solution? The answer is probably not. Again, from a beginning point of view, it's something that has been around for many, many decades. But legacy AV solutions, they do fall short, especially when it comes to the more complex, more involved attack vectors that malactors are starting to take these days. But again, great question. That's part of the reason why we exist, candidly.
Yeah, I mean, and the real world use case that our workflow diagram was based off of, I mean, this law firm, they had their endpoint security tools and they had a sandbox, but it just wasn't, those tools weren't able to keep up. And that's
Correct.
really where, where we come into play. And so, it's, again, we're able to do that at scale and at speed and at the depth of that analysis that the existing tools can't.
Yeah, and actually to that point, what they ended up going with was our solution and the third-party sandbox solution as well that they tied directly to the A1000. So anytime that a file has been, deconstructed and maybe it's found as malicious, for further analysis, the malware analysts go in, detonate that file, and bring the data back into the A1000. And so the A1000 serves as that unique workbench that gives you that perspective around very deep file analysis, while also allowing you the capability to do threat hunting across the board, regardless of where the origin of the file, where the origin of the data was.
Yep, absolutely. All right, so we can, I don't think we have any more questions, none that I see. So we can, to wrap this up, I think we have, oh, I mentioned we'll add the link to the solution brief for you guys to take a look at. And again, thank you to everyone that joined. Hopefully you found this helpful. And we're here for you if you have any follow-up questions. And thank you, Danelle.
Yeah, thank you as well, Amy.
All right. Have a good day, everyone.
Bye all. Thanks for joining.
Bye all.